Welcome to Gemara Markings. Today's Shiur is Sucah Daf Yud Dalid. We begin today's Shiur 5 lines from the bottom of Daf Yud Gimel Omid Beis. We left off our previous Shiur literally in the middle of a discussion. So in order to have any understanding of what we are going to be continuing with today, at the beginning of today's Shiur, namely until the Mishnah on Daf Yud Dalid, where, of course, we start a new topic, any introductory material would best be gained by having been familiar with our previous Shiur. So, as to, let's say, not bore those that are familiar with our previous Shiur, so we will simply continue where we left off, and of course encouraging anyone who is a first-time listener to listen to our previous Shiur. We are dealing with the immediate problem of yodos. We saw a machlokes tanoim, the yodos of the plants that need to be mevutal in order to serve as schach, and it seems that issue is a machlokes tanoim. The Gemara we left off our last discussion as saying that the source that we introduced at the end of our previous year was dealing with a case of food matter. We can talk specifically about the grains that were alluded to, the koshin ubahen shibolin that we saw now in that source, that were harvested with the purpose of eating, and then there was a change of mind to use it for schach. And that answer, of course, was an attempt to explain how Rav Menashia, who we saw in the middle of this Omid of Yud Gimel Omid Beis, was actually saying something that was aliva de kule alma. And as far as the source is concerned, it was talking about a different case. It was talking about a case where the grains were harvested initially for eating purposes, and there was a change of mind. So if that's the case, the Gemara now asks a question. This is a long question. It takes us to the upper part of Yud Daled Amud Aleph. You can see it goes to the first wide line, and in the course of this question you'll notice some additional markings. There's a double underline marking, and on the side of the Gemara the double underline is featured under the mivneh, the structural note, where you see v'chi tema, that's the term that you see double underline. These are hatsaos, suggestions, but they'll be rejected. Suggestions kedei lahasbir lama lefia tanakama, why, according to the first opinion in the Tanaic source that we saw, ein tzorech levatel es hayodos afal pi sheniktzuru bahaschola l'shem oichel, even though it was harvested for eating purposes, and food that grows, vegetation that grows, and the accompanying stems are generally understood as being yodos, and hence mekabel tuma. And if that's the case, so they wouldn't be suitable for schach. Why does the Tana Kama not indicate that you have to have enough balance of the stalk, which isn't the yad, enough to be mavatel not only the grains but also the immediate part of the stalk that's closest to the grains themselves, as we explained in our previous year, that constituted the yad. So the Gemara asks, we turn to the Gemara, 5 lines from the bottom, if that is how Rav Menashia is explaining the source, so as to preserve his own opinion, as according to all Tanoim, so my tamayu derabanan, why then in the source, where he, assuming this answer that it's talking about a case where he harvested initially for eating purposes, why does the Tanakama not indicate, like the Acherim, that there is a need to mavatel the yodos? V'chi teimo kosavri rabbanon. You might say, well, the rabbanon hold kevon de nimlach alehen l'sikuch, since he did change his mind for using the stalks of grain for schach purposes, botla lei machshavaso, the change of mind is enough to cancel his original thought, i.e. for eating. And in the course of changing your mind, so then the yad no longer has the yad status. Does change of mind actually serve to cancel something, to neutralize something? Change of mind doesn't have that strength. V'hatanan, we have learned in the following Tanaic source. Kol hakelim, we continue at the top of Yud Daled Amud Aleph, Yordin lidei tumo b'machshava, all vessels can take on a vessel status. And when we speak about a vessel having vessel status, what we mean to say is that item now categorized as an actual vessel, it would be subject to defilement if some source of defilement comes into contact with it. So once a decision is made to use a particular item as a vessel, so it enters the realm of tumah, means susceptibility to tumah. So the Mishnah teaches us in this Tanaic source that kol hakelim yordin lidei tumah b'machshava v'ein oilin mitum'asan ela b'shini ma'aseh. The rule says that a decision to use something that may appear to others as an incomplete vessel, but you want to use it as it is, that subjects it to tumah susceptibility. However, if you have an item that you decide, an item that was already determined to be a vessel, a kli, and you decided that you don't want to use it as a kli, that you want to, let's say, process it further, that doesn't work. The change of mind doesn't work. In other words, a mental decision to declassify something as a vessel, that is ineffective. And how does something become, declassified or removed from vessel status? As the source says, it doesn't arise or leave the tumah realm unless an action is done to it, some type of alteration is done to it. We often speak about poking a hole of sufficient size in a vessel that would remove it from its tumah susceptibility. Shehamaisa mevatel miad maisu miad machshava, an action is capable of undoing a previous action. In other words, if something took on vessel status because an action was done, an act of construction or formation was done, so a subsequent action done to that particular item can undo the tumah status. And likewise, and goes without saying, that an action can undo something that took on tumah susceptibility because of a mere mental decision. Umachshava, and now here we dashed underlines because this is the phrase that's of direct relevance to our discussion. Umachshava eino mevateles lo miyad maise v'lo miyad machshava. A mental decision, a change of mind, is not capable of canceling or neutralizing a previous action and not even a previous decision. So to translate things into more practical terms, if you have grains that you harvested with their stalk and grain all attached, and you harvested initially for eating purposes, the part of the stalk that's closest, that's, let's say, a hand breadth of stalk closest to the actual grains is the yad. So at the point that you harvested it for food purposes, that imposed upon that section of the stalk yad status, and as such, it's something that's makabel tumah, and as such, it's not fit for using as schach. And if you plan to use this entire stalk and with the grain for schach purposes, then you'd better be able to have enough non-food, non-yad stalk there to outnumber, to neutralize, to be the rove, the majority, in order for the schach to be kosher. And yet, the Tanna Kama didn't say that you have to mevatel the yad part of the stalk. Apparently, the Tanna Kama is not bothered by the yad being there. Well, how could that be? And if you'll say, just by having changed your mind from the original food purpose to now schach purpose, that's not going to undo the yad status. Or another suggestion as to why the Tanna Kama, the first opinion, doesn't seem to be bothered by the yad issue. You might, if you want to say that we say that machshava is not mevatel, that a change of mind doesn't neutralize something, well, you might say that concept is limited to vessels, hanimili kalim, the chashivi, that have significance, so that a mere mental change of mind isn't sufficient for changing its status. But yoda, stems of fruits, whose whole purpose is to enable you to move the fruit around, to move the fruit without actually touching the fruit. That's the yad, and its whole purpose is for eating matters. B'machshava naseh v'machshava salka. This is what you might have tried to argue, that it became a yad because of your decision to use it as food, and it can become a non-yad because of your change of mind, that you don't want to use it as food anymore. As in our case, you want to use it for schach. So that, let's just repeat this suggestion, that maybe the principle that machshava doesn't undo status is limited to vessels, but when it comes to, because of their significance. But when it comes to food items, just like it became a yad through a thought, it can lose the yad status because of the change of mind. That's also not true. V'hatanan kol yodos ha'oichlin she basason begora and tahoros. All yodos, all stems of food that you were basason in the granary, tahoros. Now we're deliberately not translating the word basason yet. If you translate the word basason as simply undoing a binding, a rope that holds them together, that holds, let's say, stalks of vegetables together, and if you say that that basason means untying the knot, that's in fact the equivalent of a machshav. It's not a significant action. And the source is telling me that yodos ha'oichlin shebasason begora and toros. If you untie the binding of the grains in the granary, then they lose their yad status. Shapir, then we can buy this suggestion that the mere change of mind removes the yad status from the stalks of grain that were harvested initially for eating purposes, and now that you change your mind for using them for schach, the change of mind really is enough to remove the yad status. Therefore, there's no need to neutralize them, to mevatel them. Ella, lama domar my basason mamish. But if you explain basason means literally basason, now literally basason means crushed. So my iko lememar. In order for the yad to lose its status, the source tells me that if it's crushed, if someone, let's say, tramples on the stalk of that's attached to the grain and frays it, and thereby making it totally soft and flexible, and no longer having a stem, stalk status to it. So then, my equal lamemar, why did the Rabbanon, in the case of his harvesting of grains for eating purposes, and then he simply changed his mind to use it as schach, why then is there no need to mavatel the yodos also? The mere change of mind isn't enough to remove a yad status. So the Gemara answers, very simple answer, Hochanami, in the Brisa on Yud Gimel Amid Beis that spoke about the Sochei Te'enim, etc., and where we saw the Machlokes Tanakam Nachirim is Shebasa Mamish. In fact, you know what happened over there? The fellow, after he harvested them for eating purposes, he then crushed the stalks. If that's the case, if he crushed the stalks, so then why do the Achirim still grant Yad status to the stalks? They said that it's not going to be kosher for schach unless you're mavatil the yados also. But you crushed them. They shouldn't have any useful status to them anymore. The Gemara answers, the Amur Rabbi Yossi. The Achirim view this as Rabbi Yossi does. Disnan Rabbi Yossi metame. Now, Rabbi Yossi was the continuation of the source we saw just 5-6 lines up. The source said, Kol Yados Shabbos Begur and Toros, Rabbi Yossi metame. Rabbi Yossi was telling you that even after they're crushed, there is still a Yad status. With that, we want to explain the Achirim back on Yud Gimel Amid Beis, as that's why they want, in the case of the grains that you want to use for schach purposes, you have to make sure there's enough non-grain and non-yad material to mavatel the yodos as well. The Gemara asks, can you really apply Rabbi Yossi that we see here to explain the Achirim back on Yud Gimel Amid Beis? Hi, my. How can you compare? Bishlama Hasam, there in the Machlokes we saw 6 lines above, the Tanakama and Rabbi Yossi, regarding the stalks of grain at the granary. So, Bishlama Hasam, Taimad Rabbi Yossi, Chazio l'Reb ben Lakish. Even though the stalks of grain have been crushed, their attachment to the grain still has use. Rabbi Yossi will tell you there in the granary, the stalks, even the part closest to the grain, still has value, still has use as a yad. The Reb Shimon ben Lakish, Hayil Uriyo lahalchan ba'asar. An asar is a pitchfork. By virtue of the fact that the grains are still attached to the stalks, even if the stalks were crushed, you can still slip a pitchfork underneath it and flip them over. And that's useful in the granary and drying out the grains and whatever is needed in the process of processing grains. Elahacha, where we're talking about using the Hacha means in the Brisa on Yud Gimel Beis, where we're talking about using the harvested stalks of grains with the grains as schach, lamai chazia, of what value is there in the crushed stalk? And in simple terms, of what value is there, and hence why do the Acher need you to mavatel the yodos? The Gemara says there is value in the crushed stalk in the context of the use of the stalks of grain for schach, i.e., the owner wants the crushed stalk to be there. Chazia, it has its fit, it has value. L'chisosar, when Sukkah is over and you undo the Sukkah, sosar is you take it apart, and all of the schach is lying on the ground, and in your case your schach is actually stalks of grain, albeit crushed, but they are attached to the grain. Laminkat luhu begilayhu. The Rashi explains on the 3rd line under the Gemara, begilayhu bekashin shelahem yochsum v'notlu roshi hashibolim mimohem. After Sukkot, when you're undo your Sukkah, it's easier to grab the grains by their stalks. They're still attached. They're frayed, but they're attached, and you'll be able to move around the grains that are attached to the stalks more easily this way. my understanding is that after Sukkot, and you have something you use as schach and it's still attached to the grains, you'll want the grains. So it's easier to maneuver everything by virtue of the fact that you still have the stalks attached to the grains. So we've explained the Shita Sachirim as well, even though the stalks, and maybe we just summarize the whole approach here in the last our Shiur today, which we said continued from the end of our previous year, was all in the interest of showing how Rav Menashe Bar Gada is lechol hadeos as far as the Tanoim are concerned, someone who is kotzer l'schach, initially kotzer l'schach, so there is no yodos, because he's not interested in the attachment to the grain. He's interested because the grain itself is posel for schach. It's food. It's davar makabel tuma, and therefore it's not fit to be used as schach. He's interested only in the stalks. So that was Rav Menashe Bar Gada. We saw a source in which there was a machlokas tanoim about grain, stalks of grain with grains attached to them, where the Achirim said there is yodos. So Rav Menashe Bar Gada says that's talking about a different case. That's where he harvested initially for food purposes and then changed his mind and intended to use it for schach. And we pointed out that the mere change of mind was not strong enough to mevatel the yodos status, and therefore what really happened there, we explained, was he crushed the bosason, he crushed the stalks. And then the question arose, if he crushed the stalks, so with that we understand the Tana Kama that says there's no yad status because it's been crushed. But according to the Achim, why is there a yad status? Why does he say have to mevatel it? So we answered, and our final answer is that the owner is interested in the attachment to the grains, because after Sukkot he can maneuver the grains more easily that way. Maybe we didn't emphasize this enough, but those who are familiar with the issue of susceptibility for tumah, a lot of that is based on the fact that you are interested in it being there, in the status or the item or whatever, and we were focusing on that in our discussion about your interest in the attachment of the grains to the stalk. Having mentioned a pitchfork and flipping things over, the Gemara continues. Omar Rebbe Lazar, Lama Nimshalot Filason. Actually, we skipped a little bit. Let's go. We're back at Gufa, at the fourth wide line. Gufa kol yodei sa'ichlin shebasason begoren tahoros. All stems that you were basason in the granary, they lose their yad status. Rabbi Yossi metamen. Rabbi Yossi says they still do have a yad status. My basason, and here the Gemara goes over that which we mentioned before. What is meant by basason? Rabbi Yochanan Omar basason mamish. They actually crushed the stalks, not without detaching them from the grains, but you crushed them, causing them to fray. Rebbe Lazar Omer Hitir Ogdan. Basason is where you simply untied the bundles. Bishama le Rebbe Lazar, Demar Basason Hitir Ogdan. According to Rebbe Lazar, he says that the source is describing someone untying the bundles of grains. Hainu demetam Rabbi Yossi. We understand Rabbi Yossi says that it still has a yad status because he didn't do anything of significance to change it, just untied a package. According to Rabbi Yochanan, who says that basason means actual crushing of the stalks. Why is Rabbi Yossi mitame? Why does he declare the stem, the part of the grain of the stalk attached to the grain, as still having yad status? It would seem to have no value. Amar Reb Shimon ben Lakish, Hayol Rios lahavchan ba'asar. Since they are still attached, even though the stalks have been crushed. It's nevertheless still suitable to be flipped over with a pitchfork. Omar Rabbi Lazar, Lama nimshalot filosin shel tzadikim ka'asar. The pasuk says, "Vayesar Yitzchak lenoichach ishto." Yitzchak and Rivka were barren. Of course, Yitzchak and Rivka of Chumash fame, our patriarch and matriarch, respectively. They were barren, and they prayed for having children. And the term that's used in the Torah for their prayer was Vayei Oser. And Isaac prayed opposite his wife. Why is that the word that is used when we know that that the root of that word asar also means a fork, a fork in the pitchfork sense? So the Gemara answers, Lomar Loch. It tells us, it describes prayer. Just like the pitchfork flips over grains in the granary from one spot to another. If you want to move the position of grains in a granary, so you do so by slipping a pitchfork under the stalks and flipping them over from where they are to the other place. So af tfilosin shel tzadikim. So too, the prayer of the righteous, ma'peches daita shel Kadosh Baruch Hu, mimidas achazorios lemidas rachmanos, has the power of changing the mind, so to speak, of the Almighty from an attribute of harshness to an attribute of compassion. Now, what we did is, of course, we translated the Gemara. These are concepts that are very lofty. What do you mean, changing the mind of the Almighty? Who are we to do that? We're mere mortals, and the Almighty's mind, His decision-making is something that we can't even perceive. All that is fine and good when describing the Almighty in a true and lofty perspective, but the Almighty Himself beseeches us to have a connection with Him through prayer. So, in accordance with that, we know that prayer has this power. Again, how it works in that lofty realm up there in the cosmos and all, that's way beyond my understanding. But as far as from the human perspective, from the request of the Almighty and how He wants us to behave, He wants our prayers. And in that context, we are saying that prayers function like a pitchfork. Just like a pitchfork flips things around, so too prayers can turn around the plan or the thinking of the Almighty from one of harshness to one of compassion. As you can see, we have a new Mishnah representing a new topic. So even if maybe up till now the Shiur was hard to understand because of lack of familiarity with a previous Shiur, nevertheless this is a new beginning. So on the side of the Gemara we have a topic heading, the Nosei, which we indicate goes Ad Omed Beis. And when we say Ad Omed Beis, it goes to Omed Beis, when our intention really is that all of Omed Beis is dedicated to this topic. And very briefly, it's Mesachachin B'Nesorim, the ability or the right to use boards. When we say boards, we mean boards in the context of rafters, beams that one would otherwise use in construction. Can one use those for schach? Now, let's a word or two about beams. Midoraisa, from a strictly Torah perspective, there should be nothing wrong with using wooden beams for your schach. Why? Well, they are gadol min haaretz, they grow from the ground. Of course, we've learned this already in previous dapim, that schach, in order to be kosher, needs to have two characteristics. It has to be something that grows from the ground, and is something that is not mekabel tumah. It doesn't absorb tumah. It's not susceptible to tumah. Well, the beam has those two characteristics. It's wood, it grows from the ground, and it's not a vessel, it is a beam. It's at the very worst, it's pshute klietz. It's a flat, non-receptacle piece of wood, and as such, it's not mekabel tumah. So, from a strictly doraisa standpoint, nesorim beams, ceiling beams, should be okay if you go to a lumber yard or a construction company and buy beams, nesorim. They should be okay for schach. So, nevertheless, we're going to see a machlokes tanoim. Are they acceptable? And we can tell you ahead of time, the issue is on a rabbinic level, and that is, if a person is seen covering his sukkah with standard construction beams, a person could come to reason, if this is kosher, so I can simply stay in my house. My ceiling is also covered with beams. Beams here, beams there. What difference does it make where you are? So you could stay in your house too, people would come to reason. And that is not acceptable. The Torah insists that you leave your house and dwell in a sukkah. So the fear is that if we allow using beams, you might come to remain in your house. We now turn to the Mishnah. Misachachim b'nesorim, Divrei Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda says it's okay. You can make your schach using beams. Rabbi Meir oser. Rabbi Meir says you cannot do that. Nosan oleho neser shurochav arba tvachim sheirad ubelvad shelo ishan tachtov. Now this half of the Mishnah is something we're going to have to wait for the Gemara to explain. Rashi himself says, Gemara will explain who is speaking over here. But if you just looking at the words themselves, it says if you place a beam of 4 tfachim on your sukkah, it's kosher, provided you don't sleep underneath it. But we're not going to commit ourselves to any more than the translation at this point. Now, we have some markings. Notice we have a triangle. We are using a triangle, and you'll also notice the use of a double underline. The triangle highlights the names Rav and Shmuel, and they will be, let's say, moderating or presenting their own opinions as to what the Tanoim would hold, under what circumstances they argue, and under what circumstances they might agree. And that's the double underline highlights those expressions, machloikis, divrei hakol, or ki pligi, which is the same thing as saying when is the machlokis. So we so far have been very vague. The Mishnah preaches a machlokas tanoim regarding beams. Well, what about the sizes of these beams? Does that make a difference? Does it make a difference if we can say there's a certain standard building size beam that looks like ceiling beams, and other size beams that don't look like ceiling beams? So we turn to the Gemara, recognizing that we have Rav and Shmuel, and each one will present their version of the Machlokes Tanoim. Omar Rav, Machlokes b'nesorim sheyesh bohen arba'ah. The Machlokes exists when you are dealing with beams that have a width of 4 handbreadths, 4 tfachim. To Rabbi Meir isleg zeras tikra. Rabbi Meir says don't use 4 tefach beams because of and the rabbinic gezerah means a rabbinic restriction. In anticipation of tikra means in anticipation of sealing, of a person thinking, if this is kosher for a sukkah and this is the same kind of material that covers my house, why don't I just spend sukkahs in my house? So that's why Rabbi Meir says don't use them. People will come to this incorrect, this wrong conclusion. For Rabbi Yehuda, less legs, erastik. Rabbi Yehuda is not worried about people reasoning that way. Avol, b'nesarim shein ben arba. However, Rav tells us that beams less than 4 tvachim, divrei hakol kshera. Everyone, even Rabbi Meir, would agree it's perfectly okay. Beams less than 4 tvachim wide, people don't use for. Majority of people don't use them for their ceilings. Ushmuel Omar b'she'ein bohen arba machlokes. Shmuel says beams, the machlokes tanoim refers to beams less than 4 tvachim. Avol yesh bohen arba, beams of 4 tvachim, divrei hakol psula. Everyone, even Rabbi Yehuda, will agree that they are not to be used. The Gemara asks, regarding Shmuel, he just spoke about less than 4, there's a machlokes. So when it's less than 4, how much less than 4? Ein ben arba, afilu pachos mishlosha. Are you going to tell me that even less than 3 tvachim? Well, less than 3 is certainly less than 4. Are you saying that beams that are even less than 3 tvachim would be a machlokes tanaim? And someone is going to say that, like Rabbi Meir would say, they're not kosher? How kanim bi'almaninu? They're mere poles, or konim are thin, they're like reeds. It's totally kosher schach. How can you say that less than 4, meaning even less than 3, would be a machlokes tanoim, and someone would say it's puzzle? Less than 3 is no different than konim be'alma, simple standard konim. Konim are, as we say, reeds. Omar of Papa. Hachi ka'omar. So Rav Papa explains what Shmuel was saying. Yesh ben arba, 4 tefach wide beams, divrei hakol psula. Everyone agrees unfit. Pachos mishlosh divrei hakol kshera my time konim bi'almaninu. Less than 3 tefachim, everyone will agree is kosher. And why? Because they are mere reeds, meaning totally kosher schach. Ki pligi mishloisha ad arba. We have a range. Beams that are 3 tefachim up till 4 tefachim is the area of machlokes. More savar kevan the lesnehu shiur makom lo yigazrinon. Rabbi Yehuda says since they don't have the dimensions of a makom. A makom is defined as, we'll say, a domain. And a domain is understood to have an area of 4 by 4 tvachim. This shiur figures prominently in Maseches Shabbos, where defining what a domain is a major topic. So Rabbi Yehuda says if something that doesn't have the dimension of 4 tvachim is not considered a makom, it's not considered a domain, therefore it has no significance, and there's no reason not to use it as schach. More savar kevon the nafki mitoras lavud. Once you are talking about 3 tefachim, 3 tefachim is no longer a shiur of lavud. Lavud, we've discussed this in the past. If you have, let's say, using the immediate case of Sucah, of schach, if you have poles or beams or reeds on your sukkah top, you're not allowed to have a gap of 3 tefachim running across your sukkah. So if you position reeds within 3 tefachim of one another, that's enough. They're considered attached. There's more details, a little more to it than that. We're not introducing the issue of chamsam ruba mitzilsa right now, assuming you'll have more shade than sun in this fashion. As long as items are within 3 tefachim of one another, they are considered attached. And it's not a problem of avir, it's not a problem of an air space. The concept of lavud we've seen already quite a bit in this Masechta till now. So Shmuel will tell you in explaining Rebbe Meir is that if your beams are 3 Tvachim, it's no longer considered Lavud, therefore Gazrinon. We impose the Gezerah, the rabbinic restriction of don't use them as your schach. Rashi says 3 lines from bottom. Kiva nafki mitoras lavud shim hoya avir b'mokim echad mehem lo motzi lemeimar lavud. If there was, let's say you have beams that measure 3 tvachim and you were to remove one of those beams, so you wouldn't be able to say that the other remaining beams are connected with one another because there's a gap of 3 tvachim. Chashivi lios domos letikra v'gazrinon. They thereby beams of 3 tvachim gain significance, and we impose the gezerah's tikra, even on them. The Gemara continues, and you'll notice we have a new marking, the house marking on the side. They are introduced as kushos al Rav. Tanan nasan ole neser shehu rochav arba'ot tvachim. Our Mishnah mentioned the placing of a beam on the Sucah that's 4 tvachim. The Mishnah says it's kosher, but you can't sleep underneath it. You can't sleep under it. So as far as Rav's approach to things, a 4 tefach beam, Rabbi Yehuda would have said is kosher. So why is this? And in the Mishnah, this quote from the Mishnah indicates that there's a problem with the 4 tefach beam. So Bishlamo Shmuel Damar B'Shein B'Hen Arba Machlokes. According to Shmuel, said that beams that don't have 4 tvachim, that is when there is a machlokes. Avol yesh ben arba divrei kol psula. But beams that have 4 tvachim width to them, everyone agrees are unfit. Mishum hachi lo yishan tachtov. Then this makes sense. That the Mishnah says don't sleep under it. It's unkosher schach. Ella, and so it's unkosher schach. You shouldn't be under it on Sukkos. Certainly don't sleep under it. Ella l'Rav Yomar b'shiesh b'hen arba machlokes. But according to Rav, that says beams that have 4 tvachim of width, there is a machlokes, and we want to emphasize for our purposes now, and Rabbi Yehuda is machshir that a beam of 4 tvachim is kosher according to Rabbi Yehuda. So according to Rav, that says yesh ben arba machlokes aval ein ben arba divrei kol kshera. If it doesn't have 4, everyone holds it's kosher. The Rabbi Yehuda amai lo yishon tachtav. According to Rabbi Yehuda, a beam of 4 tvachim, why can't you sleep under it? The Gemara answers. There's no question on Rav from here. Mi savris divrei kolhi. Who says that this section of the Mishnah is something that everyone authors, that it's authored by all Tanoim? Seifa son, the Rebbe Meir, the Seifa that says that a 4 tefach beam that's over your sukkah, you shouldn't sleep under it, that is according to Rebbe Meir. So Rav's version of Rebbe Meir states that Rebbe Meir does not want you to use 4 tefach beams, and therefore don't sleep under it. Toshma, the house indicates another question on Rav. So we quote from a Mishnah later on. Toshma Shnei Sedinim Mitztarfin. On the top of your sukkah, you have sheets. You can see on page 40 of the Pirush Chai, the book of illustrations, the Pirush Chai that we've been using since the beginning of the Masechta, on page 40, illustration 199, a sheet is something that's not fit to be used as chach. It's something that's mekabel tuma. So the source says that two sheets are mitzaref. Mitzaref means they join up to form a unit of 4 tfachim, and we've mentioned in the past, but here we'll mention it again, that in schach posel, something that's unfit to be used as schach, if you have 4 tfachim of that running across your sukkah, and let's assume you have a minimum size sukkah, and you have 4 tfachim of unfit, unkosher schach, it will split your sukkah into 2 parts, and hence you won't have a kosher sukkah anymore. So this source says that Shnei Sedinim Mitzdarfen, as you can see in illustration 199, 2 strips of sheet material running across the top of the sukkah and down the middle of the sukkah are Mitzdaref, and join up to form a unit of 4 tfachim. Shnei Nesorim Ein Mitzdarfen, 2 beams do not join up. Rashi at the top says Shnei Nesorim Ein Mitzdarfen. We're at the top of Omid Beis. Rashi says Shnei Nesorim Ein Mitzdarfen Lepoisla Dafilu Kula Mesufechus Bem Ksheira of Rabbi Yehuda. The 2 beams aren't going to join together, as far as what Rashi says, that even if the entire sukkah were covered with beams, your sukkah is kosher. This is according to Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Meir Omer Af Nesorim Kisdinim. Nesorim can join up to create a problem, just like Sedinim, just like the sheets. Notice that we have a Roman numeral to the side, number 1, and a few lines later, Roman numeral number 2. There are 2 Lashonos in this Gemara, 2 versions of presenting this particular question. So we should point out, by the way, that this, like before, this too is a long question. You can see that we have the long question marking going down the side of the Gemara. So in seeing this source, the Gemara says, Bishlama l'Shmuel d'Yamar b'she'ein b'hen arba machlekes avol yesh b'hen arba divrei al-kol psal. According to Shmuel, it says that when the beam lacks 4, you have the machlokes tanoim, but if it has 4, everyone agrees it's possible. So my mitzdarfin la'arba'ah. The source that speaks about, let's say Rabbi Meir says that the Nesorim are like Sedinim, that they join up, they can join up to become schach posel, and that would be the case if you have, let's say, you have a beam of less than 4 tfachim, and another beam of less than 4 tfachim next to each other, so they would join up to create the shiur of 4 tfachim and be considered schach posel. The Rashi on the second line from the top says, Bishlama l'Shmuel nukmo lahach plukto nami. He will set up this machlokes. We have Rabbi Meir and the Tana Kamina. Rabbi Yehuda b'she'ein bohen dalid. The beams featured in the source are beams that don't have 4 tfachim. V'ka'omar Rabbi Yehuda shnei nesorim shel shloisha tfachim af agav the nofik midoras lovet ein mitzdarfin leposla. Rabbi Yehuda will tell you that 2 beams, each one of 3 tfachim, even though they're no longer considered lavud, their 3 tfachim is beyond the shiur of lavud, they don't join up to pasel it sha'af kulim misafim b'hen. You can cover your whole sukkah with beams of 3 tfachim. For Rabbi Meir, Omer Nesorim mitzdarfin la'arba'ah. Rabbi Meir, he doesn't want you using beams of 3 tfachim, so he will tell you that if you have 2 beams of 3 tfachim, they are mitzdarfin la'arba'ah. They join up to create an entity of, it's actually more than 4 tfachim physically speaking, but it's a halachic concept of schach posel, pasels if you have 4 tfachim of it. So im be'emtza sukkah hein, if they are running down the middle of the sukkah, the posla to passel the sukkah. So that if you have two beams of 3 tfachim, Rabbi Meir says don't use 3 tfachim beams. Now, 3 tfachim beams then fall under the category of schach posel. It's like don't use metal rods. Let's say you put a metal rod across the middle of your sukkah. Well, one metal rod, if it doesn't have 4 tfachim to it, it doesn't passel the sukkah. However, if you have enough metal rods next to each other, adding up to 4 tfachim or more, certainly, that will ruin your sukkah. So too over here, Rabbi Meir is telling you, if you have 2 beams of 3 tfachim each next to each other, that they will join up to be a unit of more than 4 tfachim of schach posel. That will posel your sukkah. So all of this analysis fits in with Shmuel's presentation. Elo, we continue in the Gemara. Elo l'Rav, di Omar b'shiyesh ben arba machlokes. Rav says that only if you have 4 full tefach wide beams do you have a machlokes tanoim, where only then Rabbi Meir says they are unfit. Avol ein bohen arba divrei kol kshera, but beams less than 4 tefachim according to Rav, everyone, even Rabbi Meir, says it's kosher schach. Heichi domi. How are we to understand the source we read at the top, where Rabbi Meir says that beams join together like sheets join together to create schach posel? What are the circa? How do we explain the beams? Heichi domi. Is behu arba'a. If the beams are 4 tfachim wide, lama lahu litzrufi, why do you have to come on to joining together? By a singular 4 tefach wide beam, according to Rabbi Meir, would passel the sukkah. You don't have to speak about them joining together like sheets. Deles behu arba amai, and if they are less than 4 tefach beams, according to Rav's version of Rabbi Meir, why is there any problem to begin with? V'hakolim bi'almoninhu, they are viewed as mere reeds. Totally good schach. Why even consider them joining together in the first place? So this is the end of our question, being according to Rav, who said what he said, namely that the machlokes exists only when you have 4 full tefach wide boards. Only then does a Rabbi Meir passel. So then how do we explain the source? The oilom de isbu arba. The beams are 4 tefach wide beams. By mitzdarfin, what does mitzdarfin mean? Mitzdarfin la arba amos min hatzad. This is a reference to the topic of doifen akuma. If you recall, we've had this in the past. Doifen akuma states, the rule states, literally doifen akuma means a bent wall. But what do we mean by a bending wall? The Halacha l'Moshe Sinai tells us, the oral tradition from Sinai tells us that if you have schach that's unfit, but it's within 4 tfachim of the wall of the sukkah, so it's considered as if the wall is bent till that point. It doesn't, even though schach posel will passel the sukkah if you have 4 tfachim of it going across the sukkah. However, if the schach posel is within 4 amos of a wall, so then it's okay. It comes under the rule of dofen akuma. Let us say you had from the wall of the sukkah beams, each one 4 tfachim, for a continuum of 4 amos. In other words, from the wall moving toward the center of the sukkah, 4 amos of these kind of beams, they will join up to create a problem of doifen akuma. beyond the realm of doifen akuma, and therefore, if you were to have schach kosher beyond that point, it's not going to help your sukkah cause, because your schach kosher is now too far away from the wall. You can take a look at illustration 201 on page 41, where this is illustrated. There you have a wall, and you've got 4 tefach wide boards lasting for a distance of 4 amos, as is illustrated. The Rashi explains. Let's read the Rashi together. It's a few lines up from here. L'dalet amos minatzad, when you are working off a wall, ein schach posel posel ele b'dalet amos. Schach posel does not present a disqualifying power to the sukkah unless you have 4 amos of the schach posel coming from the edge of the wall, moving toward the middle of the sukkah. Avol, the bebotzemehachi, less than 4 amos, gemiri, we have an oral tradition. It's called doifen akuma, the bent wall, where we view the wall as if it continues to include the schach posel that is within 4 amos of it. V'kama Rabbi Yehuda, shnei nisorim shel arba'ah, 2 boards, each one of 4 tfochim. V'chein sider dalet amos ein mitzdarfen. If you were to set up your entire sukkah with boards of 4 tfochim, they wouldn't join up. Sha'af kula roi l'schach behen, l'sakech behen. You can cover your entire sukkah with 4 tefach wide boards, according to Rabbi Yehuda, the less like gzeras tikra. Rabbi Yehuda doesn't hold from the gzeras tikra. Whereas, according to Rabbi Meir, 4 tefach wide boards would present a problem if they join up they have a succession of these 4 tefach wide boards from the wall of the sukkah toward in the direction of the kosher schach. It will then present a problem where the kosher schach is 4 amos away from the wall from which these boards began. And according to the rules of doifen akuma, you can have within 4 amos the schach posel, but if you have a continuum of 4 amos of schach posel, then you have the problem that the remaining schach kosher there has the benefit only of 2 walls. There isn't a 3rd wall anymore for it, and hence your sukkah will be posel. Continuing in the Gemara, Lishna Achrina, another version of the question that we pose on Rav. Bishlama l'shmuel d'amar b'shein bohen arboa machloikes, aval yesh bohen arboa divrei kol psula. According to Shmuel, who said that when the boards are less than 4 tfachim, you have a machlokes, but if they are 4 tfachim, everyone, even Rabbi Yehuda, agrees that they are posel. My mitzdarfin. What does Rabbi Meir mean when he says boards are like sheets and they're mitzdaref, they join together? Mitzdarfen la'arba amos min hatzad. So if you have a continuum of these boards that are between 3 and 4 tfachim coming from the side, so they'll mitzdaref to create a problem where you don't benefit from dofen akuma anymore. Ela Rav, but according to Rav, Bishlam Rabbi Meir my mitzdarfen arba'os min hatzad. As far as Rav's point of view, who said that the machlokes is only if you have 4 tefach wide boards, but less than that everyone agrees is kosher. So we can explain Rabbi Meir. We can explain Rabbi Meir, who said that the boards can join up to form a continuum of 4 amos of unfit boards. Elo, unfit boards meaning unkosher schach. Elol Rabbi Yehuda of Yomar Afilu Yesh Ben Arba Kshera. But according to Rabbi Yehuda, who says 4 tefach wide boards are kosher. This is, of course, according to Rav's version. So, my ain mitzdarfen. Why does the Tanaic source have to tell me that the boards are not mitzdaref? Konen b'almaninu. It's obvious that they're not mitzdaref. It's kosher schach. They're no worse than simple reeds. So why does the source have to tell me on the top line, ain mitzdarfen? The Gemara says, you're right. I did come Rabbi Meir mitzdarfen. Since Rabbi Meir used the term mitzdarfen, that they do join up. Now, Rabbi Meir didn't. He said nesarim kisdinim, but the idea is that they're mitzdarfen. So Amar Rabbi Yehuda ain mitzdarfen. Therefore, Rabbi Yehuda was motivated to say they are not mitzdaref. Even though in and of itself it's obvious, but simply in contrast to Rabbi Meir, so Rabbi Yehuda says ain mitzdarfen. Tanya kavose de Rav, Tanya kavose de Shmuel. At this point, the Gemara shows us that there are Tanaic sources that back up each one of the Amoreic opinions, Rav and Shmuel, in their respective presentation of the Machlokes Tanoim between Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yehuda. As we go along in the Gemara, we'll try to place an emphasis on the markings to show you how the source supports each one of these opinions. When we say these opinions, Rav and Shmuel. Tanya Kavase de Rav. We have a Tanaic source that will feature a Machlokes Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yehuda. You can see that we've underlined their names. Sucah b'nesarim shel erez she'ein. Let's read that again. Sucah, you covered the Sucah b'nesarim shel erez. Erez is a type of wood. These wood erez beams. She'ein bohen arba'ah. The beams are less than 4 tvachim wide. Divrei hakol kosher. Everyone agrees that's kosher. By the way, that is what Rav said. So this is the support to Rav. Yesh ben arba'ah. If, however, the beams have 4 tvachim of width to them, Rabbi Meir posel, Rabbi Yehuda machshir. Well, that's also like Rav. Rabbi Meir would say that's unfit, and Rabbi Yehuda, it says it's okay. Amar Rabbi Yehuda, Maise b'shas hasakona, shevienu nisarim shahoyu bohen arba'ah, and a story, an incident took place under the time of danger. This is a time when the Gentiles had made rules and edicts against the performance of mitzvahs, including Sucah, and nevertheless, an incident took place. Shehavienu nesarim shahoyu bohen arba'ah. We brought boards that were 4 tvachim wide. The sichachnu al gabi mirpeses, and we put them over our balcony. The yashavnu tachtein, we sat under these 4 tefach wide boards, and everything was fine. That's the Maisa. He's trying to use, Rabbi Yehuda is trying to back up his position with this incident, that 4 tefach wide boards are okay. Amru lo. So the ones who heard Rabbi Yehuda's testimony, they responded to him and said, Misham Raya, from there you're trying to bolster your point of view. Ein shas hasakona raya. The time of duress, of danger, is not proof. When the Jews are subjected to all kinds of extenuating circumstances, so as we said before, we were dealing with rabbinic law, so there's room for leniency, there's room for bending, so to speak, for accepting something that under better conditions we would not accept. So you can't bring proof from an incident of shas asakona, from dangerous times, to standard halacha. Tanya kavasi de Shmuel. Now we have a Tanaic source supporting Shmuel's approach to the Machlokes Tanoim. They covered a sukkah, or one who covers a sukkah with erez boards 4 tvachim wide. Divrei hakol psula. Of course, you can appreciate why we've underlined this. This is the main point. This source supports Shmuel that when you reach 4 tefach of width in the boards, everyone agrees. Even Rabbi Yehuda agrees it's unfit. Ein bohen arba, Rabbi Meir posav, Rabbi Yehuda machshir. If it doesn't have 4 tefachim, then Rabbi Meir passes. Rabbi Yehuda says it's okay. Umoida Rabbi Meir she'im yesh bein neser leneser k'mlo neser. Rabbi Meir will concede that if you have, we'll call these unfit boards, let's say 3 tefach wide boards, but between each board, that's yesh bein neser. Neser is the singular of nesarim. If you have between each unfit board, kimlo neser, the same width as the board itself. In other words, you have a gap of space between the board. So you have board gap, and the gap is the same width as the board. Sheminich psal benem ukshera. Psal is a word meaning schach. Without getting into the etymology, Rashi does explain, but psal means schach. That Rabbi Meir will concede that you can place, if you place kosher schach between them, then your sukkah is acceptable. Umoide Rabbi Yehuda she'im nosan olel neser shurochav arba tvachim. Rabbi Yehuda, who is the more lenient opinion, he will concede that if you placed a beam of 4 tefachim of width over your sukkah, kshera, the sukkah is kosher, v'ein yishenim tachtov, but you are not to sleep under it. So Rabbi Yehuda, who is the, as we say, the more lenient opinion, will agree that if you place a beam of 4 tefachim, the sukkah is kosher. However, v'ein yishenim tachtov, you don't sleep under it. Vayoshin tachtov lo yotzi yadecha v'asa. One who sleeps under it has not fulfilled his requirement. Let's take a look at Rashi, just a few lines up from here. In the Rashi column, Rashi says, Umoide Rabbi Yehuda, Tiafal Gavdiu Mekil, B'She'ein Bohem Arba, even though he is lenient with boards that are less than 4 Tvachim, Moide B'Neser Echad, he will concede that if you have a singular board, Ubo Arba, that has a width of 4 Tvachim, Shimnosno B'Sukkah Minat Sad, that if you placed it on the sukkah, but near the wall, Sha'afalpi Shik Shero Minat Sad Dofen Akuma, even though Dofen Akuma states that the sukkah remains kosher, Lo Yishan Tachtov, don't sleep under it. So that even though the 4 tefach wide board doesn't ruin because it's within 4 amos of the wall, and hence we apply the Dofen Akuma concept that the wall bends till that point, and then any schach kosher that exists from that point till the opposite wall will be the beneficiary of having 3 walls around it. Nevertheless, don't sleep under it. We continue in the Gemara with a new discussion, but all under the general heading of the Nisarim, the issue of Nisarim. This is Hofchon al Hatzad. Itmar. Hofchon al Tzidehem. You took a board of 4 Tvachim width and stood them upright, stood them, as you can see in the illustration, 205 on page 41 of the Pirush Chai, the bottom picture, so that he stood the boards up on their edges. Rav Una Omar Psula, for Rav Chisda, for Rabbo Ba Rav Huna Amri Kshera. Now, of course, to appreciate this, it would be best understood that we're not working within the opinion of Rebbe Yehuda as was presented by Rav, because as far as that opinion is concerned, these boards are okay. But according to let us say Rav's version of Rabbi Meir, or Shmuel's version of Rav and Shmuel's version of Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Meir, 4 tefach boards are basically problematic. However, what happens if you stand them up on their edges, like we see in illustration 205? So Rav Huna Omar Psula, Rav Chisda Rabo Ba Rav Huna Amri Kshera. We have a machlokes amoroyim here, and a little story that follows. Iklo Rav Nachman L'Sura. Rav Nachman, whose name we didn't see in the last 2 lines, he is a visitor. He comes to Surah. Il L'Gabe Rav Chisda Rabo Ba Rav Huna. Rav Chisda and Rabbo visit Rav Nachman, and we should point out that Rav Chisda and Rabbo, they were lenient with the 4 tefach boards stood up on their edge. So we'll call them the lenient ones, they visit with Rav Nachman. Amri Lei, they ask him, what is the din regarding these boards, 4 tefach boards that you stand up on their edge? Amar Lahu Psula. Rav Nachman rules like Rav Huna that it's unfit. And the explanation, Nasu Kishpudin Shel Mateches. They're unfit because once you have a board 4 tefach in width, it's called unfit schach. And unfit schach is just as bad as rods made of metal. Shpudin Shel Mateches. And however you position Shpudin Shel Mateches, it's unfit for covering your sukkah with it. So too, it doesn't matter how you position 4 tefach wide boards; they are unfit. Omar Lahu Rav Huna. Rav Huna, you can imagine, probably has a grin on his face, and he says to them, he says to Rav Chisda and Rabbo Bar Rav Huna, he says to them, Lo Amri Lechu Amri Kavasi, didn't I tell you to hold like me? Amru Lei. So they, Rav Chisda and Rabbo Rav Huna, said back, Omi Omar Lon Mor Taimo Velo Kablinon Mine. Did you, sir, give us a reason for your opinion and we didn't accept it? You said they're apostle, but you didn't give any explanation. Rav Nachman, at least, he gave an explanation. Amar Lahu, so Rav Huna said back to them, Omi Bo'isu Minoi Taimo Velo Amri Lahu. Did you request of me a reason that I didn't tell you? A very fascinating give and take over here, and there's a certain amount of we'll say educational value in trying to understand when you are speaking to someone or saying halachas to someone. Are you expected to volunteer the reason, or is that something that the listener has to request of you? Seems to be maybe a difference of thought in terms of teaching over ideas, something that is a topic worth looking into in and of itself. But for our purposes, we continue with this discussion. Lemo Messiah Le. Here we have a long question. Lemo is a suggestion. Shall we say that we can bring a support to Rav Huna that said that Hofchanal Tzidein, standing up the 4 tefach wide boards, is still unfit, the sukkah is still unkosher? Can we support him from the following? So, Lema Sele, and you can see we have a dashed underline at the end of the source. That's really the main point of attempting to support Rav Huna. So the source says, Eino machzekes kidei rosho v'ruba v'shulchano. If your sukkah is not capable of containing your head, torso, and your table, oy shenifritza bo pirtza kidei shizdake bo gediba bas roish, or a breach takes place in the sukkah so that a goat kid. And you can see an illustration of this 206. There's a breach at the bottom of the wall where there's a gap of 3 tfachim. The expression is Kadeshi is Daker Bo Gedi. Gedi is a goat, a young goat, kid, can penetrate, enter easily. So that ruins the wall from being a kosher mechitza. And this is where we start getting interested. Or he placed upon the sukkah a board measuring 4 tfachim wide. Even though he didn't place over the sukkah any more than 3 tfachim of the 4 tfachim board. Well, hechidami, what does that mean? You have a 4 tefach board it's 4 tefach in width. What does it mean that you have only 3 tfachim of it over the sukkah? Lav kedgon shahofchon al tzidam. Is it not a case where he stood the 4 tefach wide board on its edge? So where the edge is, it's instead of we would call this a 3x4. In other words, its width is 4 tefachim and its thickness is 3 tefachim. So he stood the boards up in their thickness. And the source says it's not kosher. So that this would support Rav Huna, Hafchon al Tzidein, standing a board up on its edge. The sukkah is posel. It's still unfit. The Gemara says, Loi, this source is not a support to Rav Huna because the circumstances are something else altogether. The case featured over here is Kagon to Ancha Apuma de Metalalasa. He took this board, and you can see illustration 207. He took the 4 tefach wide board, placed it flat on top of the sukkah. However, only 3 of the 4 tefachim are actually over the sukkah, with 1 additional tefach protruding beyond the sukkah. Reading that in the words, the oncha apuma. Puma is the entrance. The metalasa is the sukkah. The ayol tlasa legav. 3 are inside the sukkah. The apik chad lebar, 1 tefach remains outside the sukkah. The hava le psal hayotzim min sukkah. This is an example of psal. Psal again means schach, that protrudes beyond the sukkah. V'chol psal hayotzim min sukkah nidon kesukkah. Schach that protrudes beyond the sukkah is nevertheless considered like part of the sukkah. Now, what does that mean for us? So let's take a look at the Rashi. Apuma de metalulasa, Eitzel ruach revi. Ruach is the 4th side. Revi is the 4th. The 4th side of the sukkah, the entranceway in this case. She'ein sham doifen, the lifkei minei ayadei doifen akuma. You don't have the benefit of a wall to, let's say, legitimatize or absorb within the context of the wall a 4 tefach wide beam. All you have here is an entranceway. And even though you don't have all of it within the boundaries of the walls, you have only 3 of the 4 tefachim within the sukkah, posel. It's still unfit. Tahu tefach davroi mechshav nami ki sukkah. That 1 tefach that's outside is considered part of the sukkah. The ilu schach kosher have. If, let's say, you had schach kosher branches at the entranceway, and part of the branches were protruding beyond the entranceway, have a muter lishon sham v'yotze yedei sukkah. You would be able to sleep there. In other words, outside the entrance of the sukkah, but you are covered by, if you would be covered by kosher schach. That when you have branches, kosher schach extended beyond the sukkah, it's considered like the sukkah. So here, in this case, what you see in 207, you have to say that the entire, even though all you have over the sukkah itself are 3 tvachim, you certainly would not be able to sit under that because the 4th tefach is also considered part of the sukkah. Naturally, and he doesn't illustrate it here, but if the entire sukkah was a minimum size sukkah, and you had, let us say, you had 4 tvachim of kosher schach and this kind of arrangement, so in effect you'd have 4 tvachim of kosher schach and 4 tvachim of unkosher schach, so you wouldn't have a kosher sukkah. There's much more to say on that particular topic, that last example, but Rashi himself, you can see, doesn't get too involved. All he tells you is that because of the concept of psal hayotzim min sukkah is considered a sukkah, that's a kind of double-edged sword. That if it's schach kosher that extends beyond the sukkah, you're able to spend your sukkahs under the part protruding forward from the sukkah. And the flip side is that if it's this, you can't spend time under the 3 tvachim that are within the sukkah, because the 4th tefach that's beyond the sukkah is considered as if it's part of the sukkah as well, and 4 tefach of board is not acceptable. But for our purposes, this source doesn't deal with Hafchan al Tzidehen, so we can't say that the psul in this source is a support to Rav Huna. Before we conclude, let us remind you that if you wish to be in touch with us, we can be reached at gmarkings@gmail.com. With that, we conclude our Shiur for today.